Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I spent 12 years as a deputy sheriff in rural Montana before that night, on Highway 287. Most people don't realize how dark and empty those stretches of interstate get after midnight. Miles and miles of nothing but asphalt cutting through grassland, with maybe one car passing every half hour. I was working the graveyard shift that October, just me and my partner covering about 200 miles of highway and the small towns scattered between them. The dispatcher, Nancy, was this 60-something woman who'd been there since the department opened, and she had this way of keeping her voice completely calm no matter what came through those phones. But around 2 a.m. that Friday, even Nancy sounded rattled when she patched through the first call. A trucker heading south had called 911 saying he heard a woman screaming somewhere near mile marker 47, said it sounded like she was being murdered right there on the shoulder. By the time I got there 15 minutes later, I found his rig pulled over with the engine still rumbling, driver door hanging open, and no sign of him anywhere. The cab still smelled like fresh coffee and cigarettes, and his logbook was open on the passenger seat with an entry half finished. The pen had rolled onto the floor. I called out for him, swept my flashlight across the tall grass on both sides of the road, but there was nothing, just the endless chirping of crickets and the distant hum of power lines. His wallet was still in the center console, $200 in cash untouched, and his cell phone was on the dashboard showing the 911 call still connected. I radioed Nancy to check if the trucker had called back or if another unit had picked him up somewhere, but she said the line just went dead after he'd reported his location. While I was processing the scene, she got another call, this time from a woman in a sedan about 3 miles north, same story. Horrible screaming coming from the roadside, sounded like someone in agony. I told Nancy to keep the woman on the line and floored it up there, but when I arrived 8 minutes later, I found another abandoned vehicle, a silver Toyota with the engine running, purse still on the seat, driver's door wide open to the night. The pattern was too specific to ignore. Both vehicles found with doors open, engines running, personal belongings untouched, and both drivers had called about hearing screams before vanishing. I started documenting everything while waiting for backup, taking photos of the Toyota's interior, noting that her coffee was still warm in the cup holder, her phone showing a call to her husband at 11:47 p.m., probably letting him know she was on her way home. That's when Nancy's voice crackled through my radio again, and this time she was talking fast, saying she had a teenage girl on the line who was pulled over near mile marker 52, crying and begging for help. The girl kept saying, "He's walking toward my car," over and over, and then Nancy played the audio for me through the radio. I could hear this kid, couldn't have been older than 17, sobbing and saying, "Please don't let him take me. He already took the others. I saw him put them in the..." And then nothing, just the sound of wind and static. Nancy tried calling back but got no response. I was only 4 miles from mile marker 52, so I hit the sirens and pushed my cruiser up to 90, calling for immediate backup from state police and anyone else within 50 miles. The whole time I'm driving, I'm trying to piece together what's happening. 3 people reporting screams, 3 people disappearing within an hour, all along the same 20-mile stretch of highway. When I reached marker 52, I saw the car immediately. A beat-up Honda pulled onto the shoulder with its hazards still blinking. The driver door was open just like the others, but this time I noticed something different. There were drag marks in the gravel leading away from the vehicle, like someone had been pulled across the ground. I followed them with my flashlight for about 30 feet before they just stopped, right at the edge where the shoulder met the grass, as if whoever made them had been lifted up and carried from that point. My backup was still 20 minutes out when I made the decision to search the area on foot, keeping my radio open and updating Nancy every few minutes. The grass along the highway was waist-high in most places, and as I pushed through it with my flashlight, I started noticing these weird indentations in the ground, like paths where something heavy had been dragged repeatedly over time. They all seemed to lead in the same direction, parallel to the highway but about 50 yards from the road itself. That's when I heard it for the first time. A woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, definitely screaming, but something was wrong about it. The sound was coming from multiple directions at once, echoing in a way that didn't make sense for the open landscape. It would start from my left, then suddenly seem to come from behind me, then from straight ahead, like someone was circling me in the darkness while screaming. But the really disturbing part was that the scream never changed. Same pitch, same duration, same desperation, like a recording being played over and over. I drew my weapon and kept moving toward where the drag paths converged. And that's when I saw the van, a white commercial vehicle with no plates, parked in a shallow ravine that would be completely invisible from the highway. The back doors were open, and I could see what looked like electronic equipment inside. Speakers and amplifiers and some kind of control panel with dozens of switches and red LED lights blinking in sequence. The screaming was definitely coming from those speakers, looping every 45 seconds or so, and I realized this sick bastard had been using recorded screams to lure people off the road. But where were the victims? I called it in to Nancy, gave her the van's description and location, and started checking the surrounding area. About 10 feet from the van, partially hidden under a tarp and branches, I found what looked like a storm cellar door built into the ground, the kind you'd see on old farmsteads, except this was in the middle of nowhere with no structures around for miles. The metal handle on the cellar door was worn smooth from use, and fresh dirt had been scattered around it like someone had opened it recently. I could hear muffled sounds coming from below. Not screaming, but movement, maybe voices. I radioed my exact coordinates to Nancy and told her to redirect all backup to my location immediately, that I'd found something underground and needed the tactical team. She said the state police were still 12 minutes away, and I had to make a choice: wait for backup and risk losing whoever was down there, or go in alone. The sounds from below were getting more urgent, like someone banging on metal, and I kept thinking about that teenage girl who'd called 40 minutes ago, begging not to be taken. I positioned myself to the side of the door, yanked it open, and immediately the smell hit me. Dampness mixed with motor oil and something else, something chemical like chloroform or ether. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, and I could see light flickering at the bottom, shadows moving across the walls. I announced myself as law enforcement and started down those stairs, each step echoing in what sounded like a much larger space than I expected. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a room about the size of a double garage, lit by a single work light hanging from the ceiling. Against the far wall, I saw them. 5 people sitting on the floor with their hands zip-tied behind their backs and duct tape over their mouths, including the teenage girl from the Honda and the truck driver from the first call. They were all awake, eyes wide with terror, frantically nodding toward the corner of the room I couldn't see from my position. I swept my gun in that direction and saw him, a man in his 40s, average height, wearing stained coveralls and holding a syringe in one hand. He had this perfectly calm expression, like he'd been expecting me, and behind him was a tunnel entrance carved into the dirt wall, probably leading to another exit somewhere. He didn't run or attack, just set the syringe down carefully on a metal table, covered with more zip ties, rolls of tape, and bottles of what looked like sedatives. "You're earlier than I expected," he said, his voice completely casual, like we were discussing the weather. "Usually takes at least 2 hours before anyone checks the vehicles properly. Small-town departments, you understand." He took a step backward toward the tunnel, keeping his hands visible but moving with practiced confidence. And that's when I noticed the timer on the table, a digital display counting down from 3 minutes and 14 seconds. "That's connected to the ventilation system," he explained, gesturing with his chin toward some PVC pipes running along the ceiling. "When it hits 0, this room fills with carbon monoxide from a generator I've got running about 100 feet through that tunnel. You can try to get them all out, or you can come after me, but you definitely can't do both." The victims started making muffled screaming sounds through their gags, thrashing against their restraints, and I could see the pure panic in their eyes as they understood what he was saying. He backed into the tunnel entrance and added, "Oh, and cutting their zip ties takes about 30 seconds per person if you're careful not to slice their wrists. Math's not in your favor, deputy." He disappeared into the tunnel, and I had to make the fastest decision of my career. I ran to the victims, pulling out my knife and starting with the teenage girl since she was closest. The zip ties were the heavy-duty kind, multiple loops around each wrist, and he was right. It took me nearly 40 seconds to free her hands without cutting her. She immediately ripped the tape off her mouth and started sobbing that there were others, that he'd been taking people for weeks and moving them through the tunnels to different locations. 2 minutes left on the timer. I managed to cut the trucker free and handed him my knife, telling him to free the others while I tried to find the ventilation controls. The PVC pipes all led to a junction box near the stairs, but it was welded shut, no way to access it quickly. The girl was helping tear tape off the others' mouths, and one of them, a woman in business clothes, gasped out that she'd seen him reset the timer earlier. The code was #473# on the keypad next to the display. 45 seconds left. I punched in the code while the trucker was still cutting the last person free, and the timer stopped at 32 seconds, the red digits frozen but still glowing in that dim light. The relief lasted maybe 2 seconds before we heard the rumbling from the tunnel. He was collapsing it from the other side, and dust started pouring into the room. We scrambled up those stairs so fast that the teenage girl tripped, and I had to carry her the rest of the way, everyone coughing and choking on the dirt filling the air. When we burst out into the night, my backup was just arriving. 3 state police cars and 2 ambulances screaming down from the highway. I pointed half of them toward where I estimated the tunnel would exit, probably another ravine or hidden spot, while the EMTs started checking the victims. The girl grabbed my arm and told me there was something else I needed to know. She'd heard him on a radio earlier talking to someone he called dispatch, giving updates on the collections, which meant he wasn't working alone. Within 3 hours, we had 40 officers combing every inch of that highway corridor, and they found 2 more underground chambers, both empty but recently used, with the same setup of restraints and sedatives. The tunnel system connected all 3 sites, roughly 2 miles of hand-dug passages that must have taken years to complete. We never caught him that night. He had ATVs stashed at 2 exit points, and by the time our helicopters arrived, he'd vanished into the wilderness. But here's what still haunts me. When the FBI tech team analyzed the audio equipment in his van, they found over 200 different recorded screams, each one labeled with a date and location going back 8 years across 6 different states. The investigation revealed he was part of a network, guys who called themselves collectors, who would grab people off remote highways and trade them like inventory. We rescued 17 more victims over the next month following leads from that night, but he personally was never found. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night and I hear a strange sound off the highway, I wonder if he's out there somewhere, setting up another trap, playing another recorded scream to lure someone into the darkness. "7 months have passed since that night on Willow Street, and I still can't drive past that neighborhood without feeling my chest tighten. I'm Officer Emily Carter, been with the suburban police force for about 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything our quiet town could throw at me. Domestic calls were routine for me. I'd handled dozens, maybe hundreds. Most were verbal disputes that needed cooling down. Some required arrests, but they all followed a predictable pattern. That Wednesday night in early March started like any other swing shift. I was parked near the shopping center, finishing paperwork from a minor theft report, when dispatch crackled through about a disturbance at 4782 Willow Street. The neighbors, an elderly couple named the Johnsons, had called about violent arguing, and what sounded like furniture being thrown around next door. The drive to Willow Street took maybe 6 minutes, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked under the streetlights. It was one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions built in the late 90s, all two-story colonials with attached garages and perfectly manicured lawns. Number 4782 stood out immediately, though. Every light in the house was blazing, even the porch lights and what looked like basement windows. But there was no movement visible through any of the windows, no shadows passing by, nothing. The silence hit me as soon as I stepped out of my patrol car. After a reported violent argument, you expect to hear something. Continued shouting, crying. Maybe the TV turned up loud to cover the awkwardness. But this house was dead quiet, and all those lights burning made it feel like the place was holding its breath, waiting for something. I radioed my position to dispatch and approached the front door, noting the pristine welcome mat that read, "Bless this home," in cursive letters. The door was slightly ajar, maybe 3 inches open, and through the gap I could see into the foyer. A ceramic vase lay shattered across the hardwood floor, dirt and wilted daisies scattered among the pieces. I announced myself loudly, "Police, is anyone home? I'm coming in to check on your welfare," and pushed the door open wider with my shoulder. The smell hit me immediately, copper and bleach mixing together in a way that made my sinuses burn. In my 8 years on the force, I'd learned that smell meant someone had tried to clean up blood, and recently, the living room to my right looked like a tornado had torn through it. The coffee table was flipped, its glass top spider-webbed with cracks, and the beige couch had been shoved hard against the wall, leaving deep scratches across the floor. Dark red droplets led from the living room toward the kitchen, getting thicker and more frequent as I followed them. In the kitchen, I found a pool of blood near the island counter, maybe 8 inches across, still tacky but not fresh, probably 2 or 3 hours old based on the consistency. Cabinet doors hung open, dishes scattered on the counters like someone had been searching frantically for something. But what really made me draw my weapon was the basement door. It had been padlocked from the outside with a heavy-duty master lock, the kind you'd use on a storage unit. But someone had taken a hammer to it. The tool was still lying on the floor, and the lock hung twisted and broken from the hasp. Fresh scratches covered the door frame around the lock, deep gouges in the white paint that showed raw wood underneath. Whoever had been trying to get through that door had been desperate, working at it from multiple angles until they'd finally succeeded. I called for backup before descending those stairs, told dispatch I had signs of violence and needed another unit immediately. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, and that chemical bleach smell grew stronger with each step down. What I found at the bottom made me stop breathing for a moment. The basement had been converted into some kind of living space, but not the cozy rec room kind you'd expect in suburbia. A stained mattress sat in the corner on the concrete floor, still bearing the indent of a body. Next to it, a bucket that I didn't want to examine too closely, and a pile of women's clothing folded neatly on a plastic chair. But the worst part was the wall. Someone had drilled industrial-grade eye bolts into the concrete, 4 of them at different heights, with heavy chains still attached. The chains had blood on the cuffs, along with what looked like pieces of skin where someone had struggled against them for a long time. On a workbench against the far wall, I found what made this whole scene click into place. There were 3 driver's licenses, all different women, all from different states, Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan. Next to them sat a notebook filled with schedules, times, and observations written in neat handwriting. Subject 3, refuses meals days 1 to 3. Subject 2, attempted communication with Subject 3, separated immediately. New acquisition planned for next week. Blonde, early 20s, spotted at campus library. My radio crackled with backup arriving, but I was already photographing everything with my phone, knowing how crucial every detail would be. The most recent entry was from that morning. Subject 3 broke during night. Unusual strength display, may need to terminate ahead of schedule. Below that, in different handwriting, shaky, barely legible, someone had written, "He's upstairs. Get out now." The floorboards above me creaked and every muscle in my body went rigid. I hadn't cleared the second floor. In my rush to follow the blood trail and investigate the basement, I'd violated basic protocol. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate. moving from what sounded like directly above toward the stairs. My backup was outside, probably just entering the house, but they didn't know someone was still here. I keyed my radio as quietly as possible. Suspect still in house, second floor, approach with extreme caution. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard running, heavy boots pounding across the floor above, heading toward the back of the house. I bolted up the basement stairs, taking them two at a time, just as I heard glass shatter somewhere upstairs. By the time I reached the second floor with two other officers behind me, we found a bedroom window completely smashed out, curtains billowing in the night air. The bedroom told another part of the story. Men's clothes filled the closet, all organized by color, and the dresser held a collection of watches, rings, and wallets. Trophies, I realized, from victims' boyfriends or husbands. On the nightstand sat a police scanner, still turned on, and a laptop that was open to a University of Michigan student directory. But the detail that haunts me most was the wall behind the bed. He'd covered it with printed photos from social media, dozens of young women at coffee shops, libraries, grocery stores, all taken from a distance, all unaware they were being photographed. Each photo had notes written in red marker. Too public, lives with roommates, perfect, isolated jogging route, parents visit monthly, no. Some photos had large X's drawn through them, and checking later, we found those women matched missing persons reports from surrounding counties. The one marked, Subject 4, next week, showed a young brunette studying at a Starbucks, her car keys visible on the table with a distinctive pom-pom keychain. We set up a perimeter immediately, K9 units tracking from the broken window, but the bastard had planned even his escape route. He'd left a rope ladder attached to the window frame, leading down to a shed roof, then to a fence that backed up to a wooded area behind the subdivision. The dogs lost his scent at a creek about a quarter-mile in, where we found tire tracks from what looked like an ATV he'd stashed there. Inside the shed, we discovered he'd been preparing for this possibility. There were bags of clothes, cash in various currencies, hair dye, and 3 different sets of fake IDs with his photo but different names. Robert Brennan, James Whitfield, Christopher Vaughn. We had no idea which, if any, was his real name. What we did know was that he'd been operating for at least 18 months based on the earliest dated photos, and the 3 women whose IDs we found were just the most recent victims. The forensics team worked through the night, and by morning we'd identified the blood in the kitchen as belonging to Melissa Harding, the woman from Illinois whose license we'd found. The other 2 women were Ashley Novak from Ohio and Jennifer Tam from Michigan. Here's what we pieced together. One of them, probably Melissa based on the blood volume and the desperate message, had somehow gotten free while he was out. She'd broken the basement door lock from the inside. We found her blood on the hammer handle and tried to help the others escape, but he came home before they could all get out. The neighbors heard the struggle as he tried to regain control, furniture crashing as Melissa fought back with a desperation that gave her that unusual strength he'd noted. She'd wounded him too. We found his blood mixed with hers on a kitchen knife left in the sink. The other 2 women had gotten out during the chaos, we learned later, running barely clothed through backyards until they reached a house 6 blocks away where they pounded on doors until someone let them in and called 911. But Melissa never made it out. We found her body 2 days later, buried in fresh concrete in the garage of another house he'd been renting under one of his fake names, 3 towns over. The coroner said she'd fought until the very end. Defensive wounds covering her arms, his DNA under her fingernails. She'd saved 2 lives with her courage, creating enough chaos for Ashley and Jennifer to escape while she held him off. The house on Willow Street turned out to be just one of 3 properties he was using. The second was that garage where we found Melissa, and the third was a cabin up near the state forest where he'd been taking his victims initially before moving them to the suburban basement. Each location showed the same meticulous planning, the same horrible attention to detail. We found journals dating back 3 years, documenting his research and methods, how he'd studied police response times, neighborhood patterns, and even attended community meetings to blend in as a concerned resident. Ashley and Jennifer spent weeks in the hospital recovering, both physically and mentally, from their ordeal. They testified before a grand jury, and their descriptions finally gave us a real profile of him. Mid-30s, around 6 feet tall, brown hair always kept short and neat, spoke with a slight southern accent he tried to hide. He knew law enforcement procedures, possibly former military or police himself based on his methods. The FBI took over the case after we found evidence suggesting he'd operated in at least 4 other states before settling here. They're still hunting him, sending updates occasionally, following sightings that never pan out. Sometimes I drive past that house on Willow Street. It's been sold now, renovated completely. A young family lives there with no idea what happened in their basement. But I know. Ashley and Jennifer know, and somewhere out there he knows too. Probably watching another coffee shop, taking more photos, making more lists. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what I found in that house, but knowing he's still out there, planning to do it all over again. Colorado nights in September get cold fast, and that Friday the temperature had already dropped to near freezing by the time I clocked in for my shift at the 911 dispatch center. 8 years I'd been answering emergency calls in our small mountain town, and the job had become part of my DNA. The weight of the headset, the glow of multiple monitors, the constant awareness that someone's worst moment might come through my line at any second. The dispatch center sat in the basement of the police station. No windows, just fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead and made everything feel disconnected from the outside world. My coffee had gone cold within minutes, but I didn't care. Friday nights usually kept us busy enough that I'd forget about it anyway. 2 other dispatchers worked alongside me that evening, Carol at the far end dealing with fire and medical, and Kevin handling highway patrol. The clock on the wall showed 10:45 p.m. when I stretched in my chair, rolled my shoulders, and reached for that cold coffee. In exactly 2 minutes, a call would come through that would fundamentally change how I understood fear, how I processed danger, and why I eventually walked away from a job I once loved. The red light blinked on my console at 10:47 p.m., and when I answered, I heard breathing first, rapid, shallow, like someone trying not to hyperventilate. Then came the whisper, so quiet my brain took a second to process actual words. "Someone's in my house." The caller identified himself as Gregory Walsh, address 1847 Pine Ridge Drive, and every word came out strained, barely voiced, as if speaking any louder would bring death to his door. Through his phone I could hear the distinct creak of floorboards somewhere distant, the kind of sound old houses make when someone's walking slowly, carefully, trying not to be heard themselves. Gregory explained he was locked in his upstairs bathroom, sitting in the bathtub with the shower curtain pulled closed. Phone pressed to his ear so hard I could hear his pulse through the connection. His wife Catherine and 16-year-old daughter Megan were supposed to be in their bedrooms, but he hadn't heard from them since the sound of breaking glass had woken him 5 minutes earlier. I typed rapid notes while keeping my voice professional and calm, dispatching units immediately. But then Gregory's breathing hitched and he whispered something that sent ice through my veins. "They're not taking anything. I can hear them opening doors, checking rooms. They're looking for us." My training kicked in automatically while my mind raced with the implications of what he'd just said. I informed Gregory that Officer Daniel Ruiz and his partner were less than 4 minutes away, already speeding down the mountain roads with lights off to avoid alerting the intruders. Pine Ridge Drive was one of those isolated residential streets on the town's outskirts, where houses sat on multi-acre lots, separated by thick stands of pine trees that blocked sound and sight from neighbors. I pulled up the house details on my screen. A 2-story colonial built in 1987. Previous calls to the address showed nothing unusual, just a medical emergency 3 years prior when Catherine had fallen off a ladder. Gregory's whispers became more urgent as he reported hearing footsteps on the stairs now, slow and methodical, each step deliberate, as if the intruder knew exactly where they were going. He started giving me descriptions between terrified breaths, at least 2 sets of footsteps, Heavy boots, no voices, just this terrible, purposeful movement through his home. Then he heard something that made him stop mid-sentence. His daughter's bedroom door opening down the hall, the distinctive squeak it made that he'd been meaning to oil for months. The line went silent except for Gregory's breathing, and I found myself holding my own breath, waiting. After what felt like hours but was probably 10 seconds, he whispered that he could hear muffled voices now, low and steady, coming from Megan's room. Not screaming, not crying, just talking in tones too quiet to make out words. He wanted to leave the bathroom, wanted to get to his family, but I kept him on the line, reminding him that officers were now just 2 minutes away, that his best chance to help his family was to stay hidden and keep feeding me information. That's when things took an even stranger turn. Gregory suddenly said the voices had stopped, and he heard footsteps going back downstairs, multiple sets, moving quickly now but still controlled. Through the phone, I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere in the house, then nothing but the settling sounds houses make at night. Gregory waited another 30 seconds before carefully opening the bathroom door, and I stayed with him as he crept down the hallway toward his daughter's room. He pushed open her door, and I heard him make a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a scream, more like all the air leaving his body at once. The room was empty, bed still made, window closed and locked from the inside, no sign of Megan anywhere. Gregory's panic escalated as he ran to the master bedroom, calling out for Catherine, his whispers abandoned now in desperate shouts of his wife's name. Through the phone, I heard him throwing open the door, then that same devastating silence. Catherine was gone too. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to an open book, pages still pressed flat like she just set it down for a moment. The bathroom they shared showed her face cream jar open on the counter, a cotton pad beside it with makeup remover. Half her nightly routine interrupted. Gregory kept saying it was impossible, that no one could have carried 2 people out without him hearing something more, that the house only had 2 exits and he would have heard them using the stairs. I tried to keep him focused while typing urgent updates for the responding units, now just 1 minute out. He stumbled through the hallway, checking the guest room, the office, even the linen closet, each space empty but showing those small signs of recent life. A coffee mug here, a phone charger there, a sweater draped over a chair. The house felt lived in but abandoned, like everyone had simply evaporated mid-routine. Officer Ruiz's voice crackled through my radio at 10:52 p.m., reporting they were pulling up to the residence. And that's when Gregory said something that made everyone in the dispatch center turn toward my station. "Wait," he breathed into the phone. "I can see the police car from the window, but the kitchen door downstairs is opening again. Someone's coming back in." I immediately relayed this to Ruiz, who confirmed they were still in their vehicle, observing the house, seeing no movement outside. Gregory's breathing became erratic as he described hearing those same heavy footsteps entering through the kitchen, moving with purpose toward the staircase. But Ruiz was adamant. They had clear sight lines to all entrance points. Nobody was entering or leaving that house. I had Gregory on one line describing intruders inside, and Ruiz on the radio swearing the house was sealed tight. No signs of forced entry, no movement visible through any windows. The footsteps Gregory heard were getting closer, he said, coming up the stairs again, but faster this time, not trying to be quiet anymore. Ruiz and his partner drew their weapons and approached the front door, announcing themselves loudly. And that's when Gregory's line did something that still doesn't make sense. It didn't disconnect, didn't cut off, but his voice just stopped mid-word, leaving only the faint sound of breathing that wasn't quite his. The breathing on Gregory's line continued, steady and rhythmic, but wrong somehow. Too measured, too calm for someone who'd just been terrified. I kept calling his name, asking him to respond, while Ruiz reported they were forcing entry through the front door. The sound of splintering wood came through both the radio and eerily, a half-second delayed, through Gregory's still-open phone line. Ruiz and his partner swept through the first floor, their tactical movements echoing through Gregory's phone, creating this disorienting double audio that made my head spin. They found the kitchen door locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged. No signs of forced entry anywhere. The dinner table still had 3 plates set out with half-eaten spaghetti, forks resting on the edges like the family had just stepped away for a moment. Steam was actually still rising from a cup of tea on the counter. Ruiz called out for the family, announced themselves as police, but the house gave back nothing but their own voices. I kept Gregory's line open, that breathing still there, unchanging. And I noticed Carol and Kevin had both moved closer to my station, listening with expressions I'd never seen on their faces before. Ruiz reported moving to the 2nd floor, and through Gregory's phone, I heard their boots on the stairs seconds before Ruiz's radio transmission confirmed it. They found the master bedroom exactly as Gregory had described. Catherine's book open, her glasses waiting, that half-finished nighttime routine frozen in time. Megan's room showed similar suspension of normal life. Homework spread across her desk, pencil lying across an unfinished math problem, her laptop still warm and logged into a social media page where a half-typed message sat in a chat box. Mom's calling me for din. The bathroom where Gregory had hidden was empty, bathtub dry. No sign anyone had been there recently. But here's what made me request a different assignment the next day. Ruiz found Gregory's phone in the kitchen, lying on the counter next to that steaming cup of tea. The call duration showed 11 minutes and 34 seconds, still active, still connected to my line. When Ruiz picked it up and spoke into it, I heard his voice clearly through my headset. But that breathing continued underneath it, as if coming from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that wasn't that kitchen, wasn't that house, maybe wasn't anywhere a person should be able to call from. The investigation that followed turned up details that only made things worse. The Walsh family's car was in the driveway, keys hanging on the hook by the door, wallets and phones all accounted for except for how they could have left. Security footage from the only gas station on Pine Ridge Drive, about a quarter-mile away, showed nothing. No vehicles passing during the time frame, no people walking by. Absolutely no movement except for a single deer around 10:30 p.m. The technical team analyzed the 911 call and confirmed it originated from the house's landline. But here's where it gets impossible to explain. The landline had been disconnected 2 years ago when the family switched to cell phones only. The physical phone was found in a box in the basement, covered in dust, no battery backup, no connection to any working line. Phone company records showed no activity on that number since 2022, yet somehow I had an 11-minute conversation with someone claiming to be Gregory Walsh, describing his house in perfect detail, down to the squeaky door and his wife's reading glasses. What haunts me even more than the impossibility of it all is what we found 3 days later when Ruiz went back to do another sweep. Hidden in the basement ceiling above a loose tile that looked recently disturbed, they discovered 3 cell phones, not the family's phones, which were still on the kitchen counter, but older models, the kind people keep as backups. Each phone had a single video file, time-stamped from that Friday night. I wasn't supposed to see these videos, but Ruiz showed them to me anyway, maybe hoping I could make sense of what I'd heard. The first showed the house from outside, someone filming through the kitchen window as the family ate dinner, unaware. The second was taken from inside Megan's room while she did homework, filmed from her closet through the slightly open door. The third video was the worst. It showed the upstairs bathroom, filmed from inside the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, recording an empty tub at 10:47 p.m., exactly when Gregory claimed to be hiding there. The videos ended simultaneously at 10:58 p.m., the exact moment Gregory's voice had cut out on my line, each cutting to black with the same sound, that measured wrong breathing I'd heard continue on the call. The FBI took over the case within a week, and suddenly everyone involved was signing NDAs and being told to forget what we'd seen and heard. But before they locked everything down, Ruiz discovered one more piece of evidence that explained nothing, but suggested something far worse than a simple kidnapping. In the basement wall, behind the water heater, investigators found a crawl space that shouldn't have existed according to the house's original blueprints. Inside were sleeping bags, water bottles, protein bar wrappers, and notebooks filled with the family's daily routines, documented for months: when they ate, when they slept, which lights they turned on in which order, even notes about their breathing patterns at night. But the handwriting in those notebooks matched Gregory Walsh's own handwriting perfectly, confirmed by comparison with documents from his home office. The dates in the notebooks went back 6 months, but Gregory's co-workers swore he'd been at work every single day. Security footage confirmed it, and his family had never mentioned him acting strange. The space looked lived in, used recently, but the dust pattern suggested no one had entered it in weeks. The FBI consultant brought in to analyze the scene said something I'll never forget. Either this family was stalking themselves, or someone wanted us to think they were. I quit the dispatch job 2 months after that night. Couldn't handle hearing voices through the headset anymore without wondering where they really were, who they really were. The Walsh family was never found, despite nationwide searches and their faces on every missing persons database. The house on Pine Ridge Drive stood empty for exactly 1 year before burning down in what investigators called an electrical fire, though no cause was ever definitively determined. Sometimes I drive by the empty lot where the house used to be, and I swear I can still feel something wrong about that spot, like the air itself remembers what happened. Ruiz transferred to a different state, said he couldn't work any case without thinking about those videos, about that breathing. The official report, what little of it wasn't classified, concluded the family left voluntarily, though it couldn't explain how or why or where they went. But I know what I heard that night. Real terror in Gregory's voice, real footsteps in that house, and then that breathing that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The truth is, some cases don't get solved because there's no solution that makes sense in the world we think we understand. And the Walsh family disappearance is one of them. All I know for certain is that somewhere, maybe not in a place we can point to on a map, Gregory Walsh made a phone call that couldn't have happened, describing events that both did and didn't occur, and then vanished along with his family into whatever space exists between possible and impossible. I need everyone here to understand that what I'm about to share isn't some creepypasta or urban legend. This actually happened to me and 12 other families in our neighborhood last summer. I'm a 34-year-old accountant, married with 2 kids, and we'd been living in our house in a quiet subdivision outside Phoenix for about 6 years when everything went to hell. Life was pretty standard suburban stuff. Barbecues on weekends, kids playing in the cul-de-sac, everyone keeping their lawns perfect for the HOA. I worked from home most days. My wife Lauren taught at the local elementary school, and our biggest concern was whether our son made the Little League team. That all changed on a Wednesday morning in late July when I woke up on my living room floor with the worst headache of my life and absolutely no memory of how I got there. The first thing I noticed, besides the splitting pain behind my eyes, was that my mouth tasted like I'd been sucking on pennies all night. Lauren was passed out on the couch, still in her pajamas, and our kids, 8-year-old Jason and 6-year-old Mia, were sprawled on the carpet near the TV, which was still playing some cartoon on low volume. The digital clock on the cable box showed 11:47 a.m., which made 0 sense because my internal alarm always woke me at 6:30, even on weekends. I tried to sit up and the room spun so violently I had to grab the coffee table to keep from falling over. That's when I saw our front door was wide open, morning sunlight streaming in, and muddy footprints tracked across our hardwood floor leading straight to our bedroom. I crawled over to Lauren and shook her shoulder, fighting waves of nausea with every movement. She groaned and her eyes fluttered open, but they were unfocused, pupils dilated like she'd just come from the eye doctor. "What? Why am I?" she mumbled. Then her maternal instincts kicked in and she jolted upright, immediately regretting it as she clutched her head. We both scrambled to the kids, checking pulses, breathing, making sure they were okay. Jason stirred when I touched his forehead, muttering something about purple elephants, which would have been funny if I wasn't absolutely terrified. While Lauren stayed with them, I forced myself to stand and follow those muddy prints, using the wall for support. They went through our bedroom, into our walk-in closet, and stopped right at the small safe where we kept important documents, some cash, and Lauren's grandmother's jewelry. The safe door hung open, completely empty. The next hour was a blur of confusion and growing panic. I called 911 while Lauren got the kids to slowly wake up, giving them water and checking them over. The dispatcher kept asking if we needed an ambulance, and honestly, I didn't know. We were all conscious and breathing, but something was clearly, horribly wrong with us. 2 police cars showed up within 10 minutes, followed by an ambulance and, weirdly, a hazmat team. Officer Reeves, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a notebook already out, started asking questions while the EMTs checked our vitals. My blood pressure was through the roof. The kids were groggy but responsive, and Lauren kept forgetting words mid-sentence, which scared me more than anything else. But what really made my gut clench was when Officer Reeves asked if we'd checked on our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, because they'd gotten 3 similar calls from our street in the last 20 minutes. The hazmat team went straight to work with these handheld devices, sweeping them around our doors and windows like they were looking for something specific. One of them, a younger guy whose badge said Flores, suddenly called his supervisor over when his device started beeping near our mail slot. They had a quick, hushed conversation. Then Flores came over with this serious expression and asked if we'd noticed any unusual smells last night, maybe something sweet or chemical-like. Lauren and I exchanged confused looks. We'd gone to bed around 10 p.m. after watching the news, and everything had been completely normal. That's when the real horror hit me. We had absolutely no memory of anything between going to bed and waking up on the living room floor. Not a dream, not getting up to use the bathroom, nothing. Just a complete black void where 8 hours of our lives should have been. They evacuated our entire street, 13 houses in total. The Nguyens from 2 doors down were missing their new laptops and a watch collection. The Andersons across the street had their entire home office cleaned out, and poor Mrs. Patterson. They found her unconscious in her hallway, severely dehydrated. The ambulance rushed her to the hospital, and I later heard she spent 3 days in the ICU. The police set up a command center in the community center parking lot, and one by one they interviewed each family. The stories were eerily similar. Everyone went to bed normally, woke up late and disoriented in weird places, found their homes ransacked with surgical precision. The thieves had taken only specific valuable items, electronics, jewelry, cash, but had left TVs mounted on walls, had ignored cars in garages, hadn't touched credit cards sitting on counters. Detective Briggs, who'd been called in from the city, said it was the most organized burglary ring he'd seen in 20 years of police work. The test results came back that afternoon, and Detective Briggs gathered all the families in the community center to explain what had happened to us. They'd found traces of sevoflurane, a medical-grade anesthetic gas, around our mail slots, bathroom vents, and even in some cases through gaps under doors. Someone had literally gassed our entire street like we were patients going under for surgery. The detective explained that the thieves had probably used a modified pump system, maybe something disguised as maintenance equipment, to flood our homes with enough gas to keep us unconscious for hours. The dose had been carefully calculated, enough to knock us out completely, but not enough to kill us, though Mrs. Patterson came dangerously close due to her age and health conditions. What made me want to vomit was when he said they'd found evidence suggesting the crew had been inside our homes for at least 2 to 3 hours, walking around us, stepping over our unconscious bodies, going through our personal belongings while we lay there completely helpless. Lauren couldn't stop crying after that meeting, and honestly, neither could half the neighborhood. The violation went beyond just stolen property. These people had been in our homes, had seen us at our most vulnerable, had moved us around like furniture to get us out of their way. The Nguyens' teenage daughter, Sophia, had been found in the bathtub fully clothed, and she had no memory of walking there. The Andersons discovered their 2-year-old had been taken from his crib and placed on their bed, surrounded by pillows. My own son Jason had apparently been moved from his top bunk to the floor because they needed to search his desk underneath. The forensics team found latex glove prints everywhere, boot prints from at least 4 different people, and traces of the gas lingering in our carpet and furniture fabric. They told us to wash everything, air out our houses for at least 48 hours, and see our doctors for blood work to make sure there were no lasting effects from the anesthetic. But here's where things got even darker. 5 days after our street was hit, Detective Briggs called me personally. They'd found similar cases in 2 other subdivisions in the area, one from 3 weeks before us, another from 6 weeks back. Same MO, same type of gas, same selective theft pattern. But in the most recent case, in a neighborhood called Desert Springs about 15 miles from us, something had gone wrong. A family of 5, the Walkers, hadn't woken up when they should have. The father was diabetic, the mother had sleep apnea, and the combination of their medical conditions with the gas had put them both in comas. Their 3 kids, ages 5, 9, and 11, were found conscious but severely disoriented, unable to wake their parents, trapped in the house for almost 14 hours before a concerned coworker called for a welfare check. Mr. Walker died 2 days later from complications, and Mrs. Walker was still on a ventilator when Briggs called me. The police started connecting dots they hadn't seen before. 3 families from the earlier robberies had reported strange things in the days before the break-ins. A van from a fake pest control company asking to inspect for termites. A woman claiming to be from the water department checking meters. 2 men in hard hats examining telephone poles and taking photos of houses. The Andersons remembered a guy had knocked on their door 3 days before the robbery, claiming he was updating maps for a delivery service and asking weird questions about how many people lived there and what time everyone usually went to bed. Lauren suddenly remembered finding our mail slot slightly bent 2 weeks before the incident, like someone had tried to measure it or test something. We'd thought nothing of it at the time. The police theorized the crew had been casing neighborhoods for weeks, maybe months, learning routines, identifying targets, calculating exactly how much gas they'd need for each house based on square footage and number of occupants. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. 2 weeks after our robbery, the Nguyen's daughter Sophia was scrolling through her Instagram when she started screaming. She'd found a photo posted by someone she didn't recognize, taken inside their living room while they were all unconscious. The photo showed her father slumped in his recliner with a timestamp of 2:47 a.m. on the night of the robbery. The account belonged to someone using the name Night Shift Crew 702, and when the police traced it, they found dozens of similar photos. Families passed out in their homes across 3 states, spanning 8 months. The sick bastards had been documenting their crimes like trophies. The FBI got involved immediately, tracking the account through various IP addresses to a rental house in Nevada. When they raided it, they found the pumping equipment, tanks of sevoflurane stolen from a medical supply company, detailed maps of neighborhoods with houses marked in different colors based on vulnerability, and notebooks full of surveillance notes about hundreds of families, including which kids had which bedrooms and what time everyone's lights typically went out. The arrests made national news. 4 people were charged initially, 2 brothers named Garrett and Shane Hoffman, who had worked as HVAC technicians and knew exactly how to exploit home ventilation systems, their cousin Diana Ross, who had nursing training and calculated the gas dosages, and her boyfriend, Paul Kramer, who'd worked in hospital equipment maintenance and had stolen the anesthetic supplies over a period of 2 years. But during interrogation, Diana broke down and revealed something that still makes me sick to think about. They hadn't just been robbing houses, they'd been selling access. For the right price, they'd gas a specific house and let someone else come in to do whatever they wanted while the family was unconscious. 3 cases were identified, where nothing was stolen, but evidence suggested someone had been in the homes for hours. One family had found their teenage daughter's room disturbed in ways that I can't even write about it. The FBI expanded the investigation, ultimately arresting 11 more people across 4 states who had paid for this service. The trial lasted 3 months. Garrett Hoffman got life without parole after they linked him to Mr. Walker's death and the conspiracy charges. Shane got 40 years, Diana got 35 after cooperating with prosecutors, and Paul got 28 years. The others who'd paid for access got sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years, depending on what they'd done in those houses. Our family testified, along with 43 other victim families. Seeing those people in orange jumpsuits, hearing Diana describe in clinical detail how she'd calculated doses to keep children unconscious without killing them, watching the prosecutor show those Instagram photos of unconscious families like they were vacation snapshots. It was surreal and nauseating. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of organized crime he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. The medical supply company that had failed to notice 2 years of missing sevoflurane faced massive lawsuits and criminal negligence charges. New federal laws were passed requiring stricter monitoring of anesthetic substances and mandatory reporting of any theft within 24 hours. We moved 6 months later. Couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't sleep in that house knowing strangers had walked through it while we lay there helpless. Couldn't walk past the mail slot without remembering. Couldn't look at our neighbors without seeing their own haunted expressions. We installed a fortress of security in our new place. Cameras, motion sensors, reinforced doors, sealed mail slots, everything. Lauren still checks on the kids 3 or 4 times every night. Jason won't sleep on the top bunk anymore. Says it makes him feel too exposed. Mia, who doesn't really remember that night, just knows that Mommy and Daddy get scared sometimes and need extra hugs. The insurance covered our stolen items, but some things can't be replaced. Lauren's grandmother's jewelry had been in her family for generations, and more importantly, our sense of safety is just gone. I still wake up some mornings in a panic, checking the time, making sure I can remember going to bed, terrified that I'll taste pennies in my mouth. The therapist says it's PTSD, that it'll get better with time. Maybe she's right. But every time I hear about a strange van in someone's neighborhood or see a utility worker I don't recognize, I call the police. Every single time. Because now I know that monsters don't need to hide under beds or in closets. Sometimes they just need a pump, some stolen medical supplies, and a floor plan. "10 years wearing a badge teaches you to expect the unexpected, but nothing in my training prepared me for what happened on Route 49 last August. I was Officer Michael Grant with the state police, working the graveyard shift out of a small station that covered about 300 miles of rural highways. Most nights were quiet, drunk drivers, speeding tickets, the occasional deer collision. I actually preferred those long, empty stretches of asphalt at 2 a.m., just me and my cruiser, and the radio crackling with distant chatter from other units. My wife Amy always worried about me working alone out there, especially after our daughter Chloe was born, but I'd tell her the isolation was actually safer than city patrol. Fewer people meant fewer problems, or at least that's what I believed until that night when dispatch called about the silver sedan. The call came in around 2:47 a.m., and I remember the exact time because I'd just finished my 3rd cup of coffee and was noting it in my log when dispatch broke through the static. "Unit 7-4, we've got a situation. Multiple 911 hang-ups from a cell phone. GPS shows it's moving northbound on Route 49 near mile marker 82. That put it about 15 minutes from my position. The dispatcher, Betty, sounded different than usual. There was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. She'd been working dispatch for 20 years and nothing rattled her, but something about these calls had her spooked. "Michael, the caller hasn't said a word in any of the calls, but the line stays open for exactly 17 seconds each time before disconnecting. We've had 6 calls in the past 40 minutes, all from the same number registered to a 2018 silver Toyota Camry, plate number Whiskey Tango 4379. I flipped on my lights and headed north, pushing my Crown Vic up to 90 on the empty highway while Betty fed me updates. I spotted the Camry about 12 minutes later, doing exactly 55 in the right lane like it was on cruise control. Nothing unusual about the driving pattern. No swerving, no speed changes, just steady as a metronome. I ran the plates to confirm, and sure enough, it matched Betty's information. The registered owner was listed as Harold Simmons, 67 years old. Address in Brookfield, about 2 hours away. No priors, no warrants, just a retired electrician with a clean record. I called it in and told Betty I was initiating a traffic stop, then hit my sirens for a quick burst to get the driver's attention. The Camry immediately began slowing down and pulling onto the shoulder. Textbook perfect, like whoever was driving had done this before. The whole thing felt routine, except for this weird pressure in my chest, like the air had gotten heavier somehow. Even with my windows up and AC running, I could feel the humid August night pressing against the glass. The Camry came to a complete stop about 50 feet ahead of my position, engine still running, brake lights glowing red in the darkness. I positioned my cruiser at the standard offset angle, keeping my spotlight trained on the rear window while I radioed my location to dispatch. Through the back glass, I couldn't make out anyone in the driver's seat. The angle and the tinted windows made it impossible to see clearly. I waited the usual 30 seconds, watching for movement, checking my mirrors for any approaching vehicles. The highway was completely dead in both directions, just empty asphalt disappearing into the darkness beyond my headlights. That's when I noticed the driver's door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch or two, like someone had pulled the handle but hadn't pushed it fully open. The interior dome light wasn't on, which meant either the bulb was out or someone had deliberately disabled it. I grabbed my flashlight, unclipped my holster retention strap out of habit, and stepped out into the thick night air. The walk to the Camry felt longer than it should have, maybe 20 steps that stretched out like a mile. My boots crunched on the gravel shoulder, and I could hear crickets in the tall grass beside the road, their rhythm almost hypnotic. As I approached the driver's side, I kept my flashlight low, using proper approach technique while announcing myself. "State Police, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." No response. The door was definitely cracked open, and through the gap I could smell something strange. Not marijuana or alcohol, but something medicinal and sharp, like hospital disinfectant mixed with copper. I reached for the door handle with my left hand while keeping my right near my weapon, then slowly pulled it open. The driver's seat was empty, completely empty. The engine was still running, the radio playing some talk show at barely audible volume. And there on the dashboard was a cell phone, screen lit up showing an active call to 911. The timer showed 17 seconds and counting. My training kicked in before my brain could fully process what I was seeing. I immediately stepped back, scanning the immediate area while calling it in. "Dispatch, I've got an abandoned vehicle, engine running, no driver present. There's a cell phone here with an active 911 call." Betty's response came through with static. "Michael, that's the 7th call. It just connected 40 seconds ago." The math didn't add up. I'd been watching this car for at least 2 minutes before approaching. Nobody had gotten out. I swept my flashlight across the passenger seat, the back seats, even the floor. Everything was pristine, untouched, except for one detail that made my throat go dry. The driver's seat was still warm, and the seatbelt was buckled. Not just buckled, but adjusted to fit someone roughly my height, and when I looked closer, there were fresh indent marks in the leather like someone had been sitting there moments ago. I backed away from the vehicle and did a full 360-degree scan of the area. The shoulder dropped off into a drainage ditch about 4 feet deep, filled with kudzu and brambles so thick you couldn't see the bottom. On the other side of the highway, there was nothing but pine forest, the trees packed so tight their trunks looked like prison bars in my flashlight beam. If someone had run into those woods, I would have heard them crashing through the underbrush. If they'd gone into the ditch, they'd still be fighting through those vines. The phone on the dashboard suddenly went dead, exactly at 17 seconds, just like Betty had described. Then, while I was still staring at it, it started dialing 911 again on its own. Not a pocket dial, not a malfunction. I could see the screen clearly showing someone navigating through the phone app, selecting the keypad, and deliberately entering 911, except nobody was touching it. My mouth went completely dry as I watched invisible fingers tap the green call button. Betty's voice crackled through my radio again. but this time she sounded panicked. "Michael, we just got another unit's dash cam footage from earlier tonight. A cruiser passed that same Camry going southbound 3 hours ago near exit 15. She paused and I could hear her breathing heavily. "Michael, the footage shows someone in the driver's seat, but the thermal imaging isn't picking up any heat signature. The person-shaped figure in the seat is reading the same temperature as the air around it." I was already moving back to my cruiser when she continued. "We ran the plate history. That car's been spotted on traffic cameras at 14 different locations tonight, always driving exactly the speed limit, always staying in the right lane. Michael, Harold Simmons died 6 weeks ago. Heart attack at his home in Brookfield. His family reported the car stolen from his driveway 3 days after the funeral, but then they called back the next morning to say it had returned on its own, parked exactly where it had been, with an extra 47 miles on the odometer. I was processing this information when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car door closing. Not slamming, just a gentle, deliberate click. I spun around to see the Camry's driver door was now shut. The phone was gone from the dashboard. The engine was still running, but now the car was in gear, creeping forward at maybe 2 miles per hour along the shoulder. I ran toward it, grabbed the door handle, and yanked it open. The smell hit me harder this time, that medicinal copper scent so strong it made my eyes water. The seat was ice cold now, like it had been refrigerated, and there were wet marks on the leather that weren't there before. They looked like condensation marks, the kind you get when something frozen sits in a warm place. But the pattern was specific, the outline of thighs, lower back, shoulder blades, human-shaped. The car kept rolling forward, and when I reached in to grab the wheel, my hand touched something wet and viscous on the steering wheel, clear and thick like medical gel. I managed to throw the car into park and kill the engine, then stumbled back to my cruiser to call for backup. My hands were numb where I'd touched that substance, and I could see my breath in the August heat every time I exhaled near where it had made contact with my skin. Betty was trying to tell me something about more cameras, more sightings, but I couldn't focus because I'd just noticed something in my peripheral vision. The Camry's trunk had popped open just slightly, maybe an inch. I hadn't touched it, hadn't hit any button. I approached it slowly, my service weapon drawn now because protocol had gone out the window. When I lifted the trunk fully open with my flashlight, I found medical equipment, IV bags filled with that clear gel, tubes, monitoring devices I didn't recognize. Everything was connected to a car battery with modified cables, still running, still pumping that substance through tubes that led to nowhere. They just ended in mid-air, like they should have been connected to something that wasn't there anymore. That's when I saw the notebook, tucked between 2 of the IV bags. It was a medical chart with Harold Simmons' name at the top, but the dates were all wrong. Entries from after his death, detailed notes about treatment, vital signs, medication schedules. The handwriting got progressively worse as the entries went on, from neat medical script to barely legible scratches. The last entry was from that night, just the time, 2:47 a.m. and a single word, driving. I was photographing everything with my phone when I heard voices coming from the woods. Not calling for help, not trying to hide, just having a normal conversation like 2 people walking through a forest at 3 a.m. was perfectly reasonable. I called out, identified myself as police, but the voices just continued their casual discussion about medical procedures, about keeping tissue viable, about transport windows. They were getting closer, and I could hear branches snapping, but my flashlight beam couldn't find them. The voices were maybe 30 feet away when they suddenly stopped mid-sentence, like someone had hit a pause button. The backup units arrived 14 minutes later, 2 state cruisers and an ambulance I hadn't requested. They found me standing by my car, weapon drawn, watching the tree line. The Camry was exactly as I'd described, but when they went to examine the trunk, all the medical equipment was gone. Just an empty trunk with no sign it had ever contained anything. The only evidence was the photos on my phone and the residue on my hands that the paramedics couldn't identify. They took samples, but the lab lost them somehow. The Camry was impounded, but it disappeared from the lot that same night. Cameras mysteriously offline for exactly 17 minutes. Harold Simmons's family called the next morning to report the car was back in their driveway again. 47 more miles on the odometer. They sold it to a dealership the next day, and I heard it's been sold 3 times since then. Each owner reports the same thing. Sometimes they wake up to find it's been driven during the night, always exactly 47 miles, always returning before dawn. I transferred to day shift after that and eventually left the force entirely. I still can't explain what happened that night, but sometimes when I'm driving alone and see a silver Camry in my rearview mirror doing exactly the speed limit, I take the next exit. The radio crackled to life just as I passed the abandoned Sinclair station on State Road 78, breaking through 3 hours of absolute silence. Rural Nebraska at night can mess with your head. Nothing but cornfields stretching into darkness, broken up by the occasional farmhouse porch light miles in the distance. Deputy sheriff wasn't exactly my dream job, but after the divorce, those night shift overtime hours were keeping me afloat with the alimony payments. That Friday in late May 2018 had been dead quiet until dispatch patched through an emergency call at 2:47 a.m. The whole county only had about 15,000 people spread across 900 square miles, so when something real happened out here, you remembered it. And what happened that night still makes me question everything I thought I knew about my job. The woman's voice coming through dispatch sounded young, maybe mid-20s, and you could hear her trying to keep it together while her car engine roared in the background. She said a black pickup truck had been stalking her for 20 minutes straight, riding her bumper close enough that she could see the driver's silhouette in her rearview mirror, then dropping back 30 feet before accelerating hard and doing it again. The high beams would flash in a pattern. 3 long bursts, pause, then 2 short ones like some kind of signal. She'd already tried taking random turns, even pulled into a gas station parking lot. But the truck followed every move. Her location put her at mile marker 23, eastbound in a silver Nissan Altima, with plates starting with 4B. I was running patrol 6 miles behind them, perfect positioning for an intercept. Then she said something that made me floor it. The truck had just made contact with her bumper. Not a full ram, but enough to jolt her forward. The line went dead after that. I pushed the Crown Vic up to 95, watching the mile markers blur past while dispatch tried to reconnect with the caller. Nothing. The asphalt ahead looked like a black river under my headlights, and I kept scanning for any sign of taillights. At mile marker 21, I finally saw them. 2 vehicles about a quarter mile ahead, the rear one swerving slightly into the oncoming lane before jerking back. The truck was massive, lifted, with those aftermarket LED bars mounted on top that weren't even on. As I closed the distance with lights and sirens going, the whole scene looked wrong somehow. The Altima was maintaining a steady 60 miles per hour, not speeding up or trying to escape, while the truck stayed glued maybe 10 feet behind it. Neither vehicle reacted to my approach at first, like they were locked in some kind of trance, until I got within 100 yards. What happened next still doesn't make sense when I try to piece it together for the reports. The truck's brake lights flared bright red, and it started decelerating hard, forcing me to hit my own brakes to avoid ramming it from behind. Then every light on that truck, headlights, taillights, LED bars, even the cab interior light, shut off simultaneously, like someone had pulled a master switch. The vehicle became a black shape against black road, and before I could process what was happening, it veered sharp right onto a dirt access road between the cornfields. I had to make a split-second decision: follow the aggressor into unknown terrain with no backup for miles, or stick with the victim who might need immediate help. Training kicked in. Secure the victim first. By the time I looked in my side mirror, there was nothing but darkness where that access road met the highway. The Altima kept rolling forward at the exact same speed, never accelerating, never slowing down, like cruise control was engaged. I pulled alongside it, shining my spotlight through the driver's window. and my chest tightened when I saw the steering wheel turning slightly left and right on its own, making micro corrections to keep the car in the lane. The driver's seat was empty. No one in the passenger seat either. The car was driving itself down State Road 78 at 60 miles per hour with nobody inside. I called it into dispatch, hearing my own voice crack as I described what I was seeing. They asked me to repeat it twice, probably thinking I was having some kind of episode. I accelerated past the Altima and gradually moved into its lane, tapping my brakes to force it to slow down. The empty car's automatic emergency braking kicked in, and it finally stopped about 50 yards from my patrol unit. The hazard lights started blinking the moment the car stopped, which made my skin prickle. Someone had to have hit that button. I approached with my weapon drawn, flashlight in my other hand, checking every window before reaching the driver's door. It was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar like someone had jumped out in a hurry, but the wind hadn't caught it yet. The interior dome light was working, illuminating an iPhone still mounted to the dashboard, screen showing an active 911 call that had been running for 8 minutes and 43 seconds. The seat was pushed all the way back, way too far for someone the caller's size based on her voice. A pair of white Adidas sneakers sat neatly on the passenger floor, laces still tied. The engine was running, air conditioning blowing cold, and the radio was playing some pop station at barely audible volume. But what really got me was the smell. Cigarette smoke, fresh, maybe 2 minutes old at most, except there were no cigarettes anywhere in the car. I circled the vehicle with my flashlight, looking for any sign of the driver. The shoulder was just dirt and gravel for about 10 feet before the cornfield started, and those stalks were packed tight, 7 feet tall at least. No footprints in the dirt, which had that crusty surface from the afternoon rain we'd gotten earlier. The only marks were my own boot prints and the car's tire tracks where it had drifted slightly onto the shoulder while stopping. I even checked underneath the car with my flashlight. Nothing but hot asphalt smell and dripping condensation from the AC. Dispatch informed me that backup was still 22 minutes out, coming from the opposite end of the county. They'd managed to trace the phone number from the 911 call to a Brianna Morse, 23, from Lincoln, about 2 hours away. Her phone was still connected to the call, but when dispatch tried talking through it, no one responded. The cornfield started rustling about 30 feet from where I stood, not like wind because everything else was dead still. The sound moved parallel to the road, keeping pace as I walked back toward my patrol car to grab better equipment. That's when I noticed something that made me stop cold. The Altima's odometer was still ticking up, the tenths of a mile digit rolling forward even though the car was in park with the emergency brake engaged. The GPS on the dashboard showed the vehicle's location as moving eastbound at 60 miles per hour, already 3 miles past our actual position. I took a photo with my phone because I knew nobody would believe this. The rustling in the corn got louder, closer, maybe 15 feet away now, and I could hear what sounded like fabric dragging against the stalks. Then my patrol car's radio exploded with static, and through the white noise, I heard a woman's voice, barely audible, saying my badge number over and over again. The thing is, I'd never told the caller my badge number. I drew my weapon and backed toward my patrol car, keeping my eyes on the spot where the corn was moving. The static on my radio cut out abruptly, replaced by dead silence. Then dispatch came through asking if I needed immediate assistance. Before I could respond, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, 2 sets approaching fast from the west. The first was a state trooper I recognized, Tom Aldridge, who must have been closer than the backup dispatch had mentioned. But behind him, keeping perfect pace about 40 yards back, was a black pickup truck with those LED bars on top. The same truck from before, I was certain of it. Tom pulled up behind my unit and got out, asking what the situation was, but I was already pointing at the truck behind him. When we both turned to look, the road was empty. Nothing there but darkness and Tom's own shadow stretching back from my patrol car's headlights. Tom thought I was losing it, until he saw the empty Altima still running, hazards still blinking, and the phone showing that impossible call duration, now at 14 minutes and counting. We searched the cornfield together, walking about 50 yards in with our flashlights creating crazy shadows between the stalks. That's when Tom grabbed my arm and pointed his light downward. There were footprints in the soft soil between the corn rows, bare feet by the look of them, running parallel to the road. But here's what made us both back out of there immediately. The footprints went for about 20 feet, then just stopped. Not like the person turned around or jumped or anything. They just ended in the middle of a row, with undisturbed soil continuing beyond them. We followed our own trail back to the road and found Brianna's iPhone had finally disconnected from the call. The screen showed 37 missed calls from Mom and a text preview that said, "Where are you? Your car is in my driveway." We had the Altima towed to the county impound lot while Tom and I drove to Lincoln to check out the mother's story. The 2-hour drive felt longer with neither of us talking much, both trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Around 5:30 a.m., we pulled up to a small ranch house on the outskirts of Lincoln, where Brianna's mother, Susan, was waiting on the porch in her bathrobe, clearly panicked. She led us to the driveway where a silver Nissan Altima sat parked. Same model as the one we'd just towed, but this one had license plates starting with 7G. Susan swore Brianna had come home around 11 p.m., said she was exhausted from her shift at the hospital, and went straight to bed. We asked to see her, and Susan took us inside, but when she opened Brianna's bedroom door, the bed was empty, still made, with her work scrubs folded neatly on top. The window was locked from the inside, no sign of disturbance anywhere. The real Brianna Morse was reported missing that morning. Her car, the one in her mother's driveway, had her purse and hospital ID badge still in it. The Altima we found on State Road 78 didn't exist in any DMV database. The VIN number came back as invalid, like someone had just made it up. The phone we found wasn't registered to anyone. It had no contacts, no apps, no photos, just that single outgoing 911 call in its history. State police took over the investigation, but after 3 weeks of searching, they found nothing. No black pickup in any registration database matching what we saw. No explanation for the barefoot prints. No trace of Brianna. Tom transferred to a different county 6 months later, said he couldn't drive that stretch of road anymore without feeling sick. I stuck it out another year before putting in for early retirement. The case is still open, technically, but nobody talks about it at the department. Sometimes I drive past that spot on State Road 78, always during daylight, and I swear the corn seems to lean toward the road there, even when there's no wind. I remember that night so clearly because it started like any other patrol shift and ended up being one of the strangest calls I've ever answered in my years on the force. I was assigned to the late shift, the kind that always drags a little slower, and I'd just been sitting in my cruiser going through the usual dispatch chatter when the call came through. Multiple neighbors had dialed 911 about screams coming from a unit on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building downtown. It wasn't unusual to get noise complaints or even the occasional fight, but the dispatcher emphasized how frantic the callers sounded. That's what pushed me to get there fast. The building itself had a reputation, at least among some of us at the precinct. It was one of those old brick complexes from the 1940s, with narrow hallways that smelled like mildew and broken mailboxes stuffed with flyers. People moved in and out constantly, and I'd responded to domestic disputes there before. When I pulled up, the lot was half lit by a flickering lamppost, and a few tenants were huddled outside near the entrance. They looked uneasy, whispering to each other, and when they saw me, one older guy pointed up to the 3rd floor without saying a word. It was clear I was walking into something different. Inside, the stairwell creaked under my boots as I climbed up. The walls were lined with peeling paint, water stains forming odd shapes that somehow made the place look even more unsettling. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I could hear a faint hum from a television echoing down the hall. Apartment 3C had its door half shut but not latched, the blue glow of the screen spilling through the crack. I called out police before stepping closer, half expecting someone to open it and start yelling at me. But the only reply was the low drone of the TV and the smell of something burnt wafting through the air. Pushing the door open, I noticed the details right away, things that didn't add up. A pot was still sitting on the stove, smoke curling from whatever had been left unattended inside, like someone walked away mid-cooking. Plates were laid out on the counter, as if dinner was just about to be served. The TV was blasting a late-night game show, and a jacket hung over the back of the couch. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a second, except the neighbors swore they heard blood-curdling screams. That contradiction hit me harder than I care to admit, and the silence of the place was thick enough that I caught myself holding my breath without realizing it. I moved further inside, announcing myself again, louder this time. The sound of my own voice bounced off the walls, too sharp against the quiet. The bedroom door was wide open, sheets tossed on the bed like someone had gotten up in a hurry. In the bathroom, the sink was running with a thin trickle of water, steam fogging up the small mirror above it. I shut the faucet, listening carefully, and that's when I heard it. 3 distinct thuds. Not heavy footsteps, not furniture shifting, but more like fists against drywall. It came from the living room wall, just a few feet from where I was standing. I pressed my ear close to the spot, half convinced I'd find a pipe knocking or maybe a neighbor messing around next door. But the rhythm wasn't mechanical. It was uneven, desperate. 2 knocks, then silence, then a muffled scrape. The hairs on my arms stood up as I realized it wasn't coming from the neighboring unit. It was from inside the wall itself. I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing, and glanced toward the apartment door, wondering if I should call in backup before tearing through the place. Another bang cut through the air, harder this time, shaking a picture frame loose from its nail. It clattered to the floor near my boots, the glass cracking across the smiling faces of some family photo. I shouted again, demanding whoever was in there identify themselves. The only answer was more pounding, now moving along the wall toward the kitchen, as if something or someone was crawling behind the plaster. I couldn't wrap my head around how that was even possible, but every instinct told me the tenant hadn't just walked out. I pulled out my radio to request additional units, but before I could key it, a voice slipped through the static of the TV. Not a show host anymore, not the game show laughter. It was faint, almost buried beneath the noise, but I caught it, a man's strained voice repeating, "Help me." The sound wasn't synced with the broadcast. It seemed to be leaking through the speakers in short bursts. My stomach tightened as I realized the calls weren't from a neighbor guessing. Someone really was trapped, and I was standing in the only place where the walls themselves seemed to breathe. I drew closer to the kitchen wall where the banging had shifted. The cabinets rattled slightly with each strike, like the force was pushing through from the other side. I tapped the drywall with my knuckles, and instantly another knock responded in sync. That moment confirmed it. Someone was back there. I shouted that help was on the way, though my voice cracked a little more than I wanted. My radio finally came alive, and I quickly called for backup and maintenance to bring tools. While I waited, I kept talking, trying to reassure whoever was trapped, even though they never spoke back again. Minutes stretched like hours until the second unit arrived. 2 other officers rushed in, and with their help, we pulled the stove away from the wall and started working the panel behind it. The drywall crumbled easily, and what we uncovered made the air in the room feel heavier. There was a hollow space, not a simple utility gap, an actual crawl area that shouldn't have existed according to the building's design. Inside, wedged against the beams, was a man in his late 20s, covered in dust and trembling violently. His fingernails were bloody, his face streaked with sweat and grime. He gasped when we reached for him, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. We pulled him out carefully, and the smell that followed was unbearable, stale air mixed with rot, as if that space had been sealed for decades. He clung to my arm with surprising strength, eyes darting around the apartment as if expecting someone else to crawl out after him. He didn't explain how he'd gotten in there or why, and in truth, none of us pressed him too hard in that moment. The paramedics who arrived later kept asking questions, but the man just repeated the same broken phrase. "He put me there." No name, no explanation, just that. The apartment was sealed off for investigation, and I never did learn the full story. The building manager swore there was no record of any hidden crawl spaces, and the maintenance staff had no idea those walls were hollow. Reports were filed, but the case went nowhere, like so many strange ones do. To this day, when I think back on that night, the detail that sticks with me isn't the banging or the smell. It's the sound of that faint voice slipping through the TV, begging for help. I can't explain it, and maybe I never will, but I know what I heard, and I'll never forget pulling a living person out of a wall that shouldn't have existed. I rented a small place in a rundown apartment complex a few years back, when money was tight and I was just trying to keep a roof over my head. The building was one of those beige, peeling rectangles with flickering hallway lights and thin walls where you could hear every neighbor's argument. Rent was cheap, and that was the only reason most of us stayed. People came and went all the time, but there was this strange pattern. Residents would suddenly move out overnight, leaving behind furniture, clothes, even food in the fridge. Management always claimed they left in a hurry or skipped rent, but the way entire units sat untouched made no sense. I kept to myself mostly. I was working odd shifts at a warehouse, and the last thing I wanted was drama with neighbors. Still, I noticed little things. A family down the hall vanished without warning. 2 kids, a tired mom who always smelled of cigarettes, and a dad who used to nod at me in the stairwell. One morning, their door was locked with the chain on the inside, but no one ever answered again. A week later, maintenance guys were moving their belongings into dumpsters. No notice, no U-Haul, no goodbye. It rattled me, but in that building you learned quickly not to ask too many questions. The maintenance supervisor, Mr. Dalton, was an odd figure. He was always around, no matter what hour of the day you came or went. He had this jangling key ring that seemed heavy enough to weigh down his whole belt, and he wore coveralls stained with paint and grease, like he never owned another outfit. He'd strike up conversations in the hall that were just a little too long, like he wanted to know exactly when you'd be home or gone. Once, he asked me directly if I ever had trouble sleeping at night in my unit. At the time, I laughed it off, thinking he was just making small talk, but it stuck in my head. Things escalated the night I came home late and heard scraping noises in the walls of my bedroom. At first, I thought it was rats, which wouldn't have surprised me in that place. But when I pressed my ear against the wall, the sound was rhythmic, almost deliberate, like wood shifting against metal. I followed it down to the corner near the floor, where the carpet bulged slightly. That was when I realized the noise wasn't coming from inside the wall. It was coming from beneath the floor. The following day, I asked the neighbor across the hall if she ever heard strange noises. Her name was Linda, an older woman who spent most of her time knitting by the window. She told me in a hushed voice that she heard people whispering at night through the vents, conversations that didn't belong to anyone she knew in the building. She said she once woke up to the sound of heavy boots directly beneath her bed, even though her apartment was on the 2nd floor. The way she looked at me, wide eyes, lips trembling, made it clear she wasn't joking. It unnerved me so badly that I slept with my lamp on that night. 2 weeks later, a unit on the 1st floor was sealed off with yellow tape. The police came in unmarked cars, no sirens, no noise. They carried evidence boxes out and spoke in low voices. When I asked Dalton what happened, he smirked and said, "Routine inspection, nothing you need to worry about." But his eyes didn't leave mine, as if he was daring me to ask again. That same night, I heard the scraping return, louder and longer this time, like someone dragging a tool along metal. It kept going until 3 in the morning. Eventually, word spread that detectives had found something beneath the building. They didn't announce it to everyone, but rumors traveled fast in a place like that. One tenant swore they saw police hauling ladders, flashlights, and crowbars into the basement. Another claimed they watched officers crawl into a hatch hidden behind the boiler room. I couldn't shake the image of Dalton's keys, how they seemed endless, how he always looked like he knew more about the building than anyone else. What really broke me was when I woke up one night to the sound of my own lock clicking, slowly, like someone was testing it. I sat up in bed, heart racing, staring at the doorknob as it rattled gently, then went still. The next morning, there was nothing. No scratch marks, no damage, just silence in the hallway. When I confronted Dalton, his response chilled me. Doors don't always keep people safe around here. He said it casually, almost like a joke, but I could tell he meant it. Detectives eventually went public after another disappearance drew too much attention. They announced that a hidden system of crawl spaces and tunnels had been discovered beneath the building, connecting units through the walls and floors. The place had been modified years earlier, not by contractors but by Dalton himself. He had cut hidden access points behind closets, under sinks, even through the elevator shaft. The idea that he'd been crawling through those spaces while we slept made me sick to my core. When they arrested him, the news spread like wildfire. They said he admitted to checking in on tenants at night, watching them through vents or cracks he created. The abductions weren't random. He picked people who lived alone, who wouldn't be missed right away. Some victims were found alive in a locked storage area in the basement, disoriented and terrified, while others were never located. It was the kind of story you'd expect from a horror movie, not the place where I'd been paying rent. I moved out within days of the arrest, breaking my lease without a second thought. I didn't care about losing my deposit or owing fees. The last night I spent there, I barely closed my eyes. Every creak in the floorboards felt like someone shifting beneath me. I sat with my back against the wall, staring at the door, until daylight broke through the grimy blinds. By then, I already had my car packed with everything I owned. To this day, I still can't stay in apartments with paper-thin walls or strange maintenance workers lingering too long in the hallways. I always check the floors, the closets, even the vents before I unpack. People tell me to let it go, that Dalton is locked away for good, but they weren't the ones who heard whispers through the vents or locks clicking in the dead of night. That building taught me one thing. Sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're the ones who hold the keys. It was late autumn when everything happened. The kind of season where the mornings carried a bite in the air and the evenings felt heavier than usual. I had been with the department for nearly 9 years, working mostly traffic-related cases, nothing that stood out beyond the usual accidents and reckless driving. That morning, I was assigned to investigate a single-vehicle crash on a state highway. A black sedan had swerved into the guardrail, leaving one driver dead at the scene. On the surface, it seemed like another tragic accident, but from the moment I arrived, something about it gnawed at me. The driver was a man in his 30s named Matthew Price. His car was still resting against the twisted rail when I got there, windshield cracked, front bumper crushed inward. What stuck with me wasn't the damage itself, but the silence that hung over the scene. Usually there's debris scattered wide, maybe skid marks to tell a story, but here the patterns didn't add up. The gouges on the asphalt suggested a deliberate push rather than a loss of control. I remember crouching by the driver's side door, brushing aside tiny shards of glass, and spotting his dash cam wired neatly near the rearview mirror. For some reason, I knew I had to pull it. Back at the station, I plugged the memory card into my workstation. The footage loaded without delay, showing Matthew driving calmly, headlights from other cars occasionally passing in the opposite lane. About 12 minutes before the crash, 2 vehicles appeared behind him, dark SUVs, unmarked, moving with an unnerving precision. They boxed him in, one to the side, one tailing close, and when he tried to slow down, the lead vehicle cut him off. I sat in my chair watching the moment his sedan clipped the rail, shoved deliberately from the right. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't an accident, it was an execution. I printed stills from the footage, logged the dashcam into evidence, and made a note to escalate. But hours later, when I went back to check the log, every file connected to the case was gone. Not misplaced, gone. The entry that I had personally uploaded showed as if it had never existed. Confused, I walked straight to my supervisor, Captain Harris, to ask if there had been a transfer. He didn't look surprised. He just leaned back in his chair, hands clasped too neatly, and told me, "Close the file, Ryan. You've seen what you needed to see." I remember standing in his office longer than I should have, trying to figure out if he was testing me, if this was some kind of loyalty drill. But his eyes didn't flicker, not once. He didn't ask what I had seen or how I got it. He already knew. That detail rattled me more than anything. If he knew, it meant I wasn't the first to stumble onto something like this. I walked out with my jaw tight, pretending to accept his word. But my mind kept replaying the footage frame by frame. 2 SUVs, no plates visible, moving like a trained unit. Whoever they weren't random aggressors on a highway. By evening, I checked my locker where I'd stashed the printed stills, the only backup I had made before logging the footage. The envelope was still there, but when I flipped through the prints, 2 sheets were missing. The exact frames where the SUV rammed Matthew's sedan. That's when I understood this wasn't sloppy file handling. Someone had direct access, not only to the digital log, but to my personal storage inside the precinct. My skin prickled with the realization that the walls around me weren't safe. I drove home restless, the steering wheel damp from the grip of my palms. My neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing in familiar rows, but even then I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. At one point, I noticed a dark vehicle parked 2 houses down from mine. Lights off, windows tinted. I circled the block once to test it, and when I came back, it was gone. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Every nerve told me it wasn't. I barely slept that night, phone pressed against the nightstand, waiting for it to ring with something I couldn't prepare for. The next morning, I went back to the crash site alone. The road was already cleared, the rail patched crudely, like the state wanted to erase any sign of violence. I paced the shoulder, searching for anything overlooked, paint chips, tire fragments, anything physical. After 20 minutes, I found a small strip of rubber embedded near the guardrail, fresher than the rest of the damage. It wasn't much, but it told me one of those SUVs left something behind. I pocketed it, knowing I couldn't tag it officially, not if I wanted it to survive longer than a few hours. Later that week, Captain Harris called me into his office again. His tone was calmer this time, almost rehearsed, like he wanted to settle a restless dog. He told me the department had other priorities, and that this case would only create noise with no resolution. When I asked directly about the missing footage, he lowered his voice and said, "You don't want to be tied to this, Ryan. People lose careers over chasing ghosts." I left his office without answering, but deep down I understood. The threat wasn't subtle anymore. That evening I copied the strip of rubber I had taken onto my own notes at home, marking the tread patterns by hand. I wasn't a forensic analyst, but I knew enough to tell it wasn't from Matthew's sedan. I considered sending it anonymously to a friend at another precinct, but hesitation kept me still. If someone was watching, the package might never make it to him. Around midnight, I heard a car idle outside my house for nearly 5 minutes before rolling away. That sound, steady engine, deliberate pause, has never left my memory. I never saw the footage again. Weeks later, the official report was filed as loss of control due to driver fatigue. No mention of the SUVs, no mention of mechanical interference. Matthew Price became another line in a spreadsheet of highway deaths. I kept one single still photo tucked in an old case file, hidden where I don't think anyone will search. Sometimes I take it out, stare at the blurred image of headlights surrounding his sedan, and wonder how many other reports have been rewritten the same way. It's been years since that night, and I'm still careful about where I talk about this. Writing it here feels like a risk, but also a release. I've carried the weight of that evidence, the kind that vanishes not because it's untrue, but because it's too true. If I learned anything from that case, it's that some files aren't closed because they're solved. They're closed because someone powerful decided the truth shouldn't live on paper. And if you ever think a highway accident looks too clean, maybe it wasn't an accident at all.